welcome back to this next video in my gentle parenting series. If this is the first time you're here, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Kitty. I'm a registered general nurse. I'm also a lactation consultant, antenatal educator, hypnobirthing instructor, birth and postpartum doula, as well as called Mama by Three Little People. We really try to incorporate attachment style, gentle parenting style of approach to the way that we parent our children, and we have made lots of mistakes along the way, and I've done an awful lot of learning and growth, and I get so many questions all the time, particularly over on my Instagram page. So if you're not following me already, make sure and go give me a follow to learn a little bit more about what we do on like a day-to-day basis. But on Fridays I do a Q&A, and almost every single week I get a question about how do you handle certain situations, whether it is to do with gentle parenting from a newborn perspective or toddler, or going into that kind of preteen age. My eldest is going to be 11 this year and my youngest is only just turned 1, so it's a nice little bit of variety, and I've covered quite a few topics on this gentle parenting series. But today we are going to talk about independent play, the importance of it, why it is so powerful and so beneficial, and how you can foster independent play from the get. So just to get started, I want to give a little bit of background in saying where I have made mistakes and why independent play is so important to me. And first by saying that it's something that became important to me when I realised how tricky, how difficult, how uncomfortable I felt, and how difficult I found it to be in my own space, to be on my own as someone who grew up with a sibling. My sister and I are 2.5 years apart. We played together all day, every day, and I was always not like the follower, but my sister was a little bit bossier than I was, my younger sister, and she would sort of dictate and tell me how to play. And I realized that as I was going through my childhood and then all the way up to adulthood, it meant that I was very uncomfortable being on my own. And it meant that when I was given the space to do nothing, the space to just be, that felt really uncomfortable for me. And it was something that I realized I wanted to instill, that ability to just be on your own, to figure it out, to use your imagination, to get into that world, was really, really important for me. So it's something that I really wanted to instill in my children. Then along came Jess, and I did none of that. I actually went the complete opposite, and really just in the view of soaking her up every moment that I had with her, I went the opposite direction and threw myself full throttle into sitting down with her, engaging with her, playing with her all the time. And while that was really lovely, it was all consuming. And it also meant that I was standing in the way of her own ability to play by herself, to get into her imaginative world. And I've seen the results of that now. So now that she is almost 11, she finds it really difficult to be on her own. So even if we might all be hanging out doing our own things, and my 2 boys are really fantastic with independent play, possibly because of some of the things that I'm going to talk about later that we did to encourage that, Jess will still bring whatever it is she's doing down, and then need to be in the space, or she'll need more direction. So she's, I'm doing air quotes here, bored, because I feel like boredom is a very good thing to encourage imaginative play and to think outside of the box, and that it's good to sometimes be bored. So she, even to this day, requires an awful lot more direction. If there's no plan for the day, no agenda, no well, what am I going to do now? She gets really stressed and anxious. And I think that that's something that I haven't helped. So along came my boys, and I knew that there was something that I wanted to do differently. And I knew, okay, this is how am I going to get to an extended period of time where the boys will play independently, to learn, to figure out, to play in their space. And the thing is play is learning, and learning is play for small kids. So actually, independent play and creating the space for that is one of the biggest things that you can do. So you're all going, okay, that sounds great, Kitty, but what do I do to start? And I start right from the very beginning by creating yes spaces. So what is a yes space? A yes space is a space where we can have babies who are maybe crawling, walking, climbing, and you're not constantly telling them no. Constantly telling them no, constantly telling them to get down off things or don't pull that, creates like it's literally like closing the gates on independent play. So by creating yes spaces within our home, within our garden, where the kids can be free and learn as they go and not have that constant interference of us telling them what they can and can't do, it's an automatic like open the gates to independence and to allow them to explore really and truly without having those constant barriers to independent play. So that was one of the first things that we did. So we made sure that those spaces were safe, that there was nothing that was going to hurt them, that they were going to hurt themselves with. So for instance, in the kitchen, we made sure that anything that was, you know, sharp or could be used, that they could be exploring with and hurt themselves with, was out of reach, or had locks on it. So it meant that they could be in the kitchen and have things that they had access to that were totally okay. So for instance, you know, we've got to obviously create safe boundaries there, but for instance, if Atticus wanted to play in the kitchen and I was doing some baking or whatever, I could totally set him up with his own thing and he could make an absolute shambles of that if he wanted to. So it was about saying yes more frequently as opposed to, or saying no as little as you can. So figuring out ways that you can say yes. So if I'm doing baking, I can set him up with some water and some flour and some oil or whatever, and he can figure that out, make a mess, explore the textures, the sensory aspect of that, and enjoy that time in independence, learning that and learning about, you know, space and, you know, how much Play-Doh can fit inside that thing before it all squishes out the sides, and, you know, what happens if I, you know, move it a certain way. The next thing, as well as creating those yes spaces, that has worked really nicely is to work with their schemas. And this is something that I only really came across in terms of understanding that it was a thing as I was doing more reading. And this is very much coming from a Montessori style philosophy. And this is that children have certain schemas at different times of their development. So for instance, Archer is really in his like schema of like throwing and seeing how things move in space. So he's really into like balls and just throwing pretty much everything that he has. He's really into like moving things, so he loves anything that has wheels. He likes to kind of push things around the room and see how that works and how things move in space in particular. So like anything that's in the air is really exciting to him. So knowing what phase your infant is in or your child is in and what their interest is at the time, you don't necessarily have to make it a structured formal thing, and working and leaning into that can help them have a better sense of independent play, so they can lean into that time, they can lean into what their interests are, just in the same way that if I was really into, or like my husband is really into like Viking mythology at the moment, or Norse mythology, and he would literally like spend hours and hours and hours diving into that, and you know, nobody could interrupt him. Whereas if I said to him like, hey, can you sit down and like study like anatomy for a few hours, he'd be like, I'm not really that into it. He'd force himself to do it for a few minutes, but then he'd be gone. So by working with our child's natural inbuilt, you know, interests, it means you're going to get more time out of them. They're going to have more interest. They can lean into that little bit more. So figure out what schema your little one is in. I'll try and find some good resources for that down below, and just listen to them. Figure out what it is that they're interested in, so that you can help adapt what learning opportunities you're exposing them to be catered to what their natural interests are. So I might be a little bit all over the place in this video, but the next topic is going to be don't interrupt. So oftentimes we find ourselves like getting involved, wanting to play, wanting to like feeling like, oh my gosh, my poor kid has been left on their own for such a period of time. And if we can rephrase that and rejig that in our minds to be giving them the gift of independent play. So they're fostering that skill to be able to be in their own space, in their own minds, in their own imaginations. It means that not only does it remove the guilt, the parenting guilt, and yes, it's definitely, once your kids have the skill of independent play, parenting becomes a lot easier. But the first step is not interfering. So, for instance, if I am like making breakfast and I put a colander down on the ground and like a wooden spoon, and Archer is like picking it up and like putting it on his head and like stirring the wooden spoon and banging it off the ground and trying to figure it all out, instead of being like, oh, hey, like you can't play with that, that's not a toy, I let him be and let him figure it out and let him enjoy exploring that. That's the first step. I should have started with that. That is the first step, not interfering. The next step really would be giving the opportunity to have independent play. So for me, it's about looking at the times in the day when when each of the children does a better time with playing on their own. For Atticus, he would wake up in the morning and I used to be able to set him up a little invitation to play. So I'm kind of giving him the idea, but then I'm stepping away. So there's so many different ideas for this. You can literally go into Pinterest and just type in invitation to play, but we might get our wobble board and put some cars at the top and make a tunnel at the bottom, and I would just leave that there and he would happily play away with that for like a good 40 minutes. Whereas with Archer, he wakes up and he wants to eat. He's like, I'm not even interested in playing yet. So once he's eaten, he's a much happier kid and he will then go and like do some independent play. Jess is the same. Jess will like lie on the sofa for ages, just kind of like waking up to the day. She's not ready to play and not ready to have any sort of imaginative play early on in the day either. So work within what's reasonable for your child, set up invitations to play, giving them plenty of opportunity, and also taking that pressure away. If the goal is for your kid to be able to play independently for longer periods of time, start small. Giving them the opportunity, setting up invitations to play, all of that is great. But if your kid is not into it straight away, it's not going to happen. So not forcing it. So making it something that is fun, that is exciting, and that is enjoyable. At the very beginning, I used to set a timer for 5 minutes and I would actually start off in the game. So I would sit down with the kids with the invitation to play, figuring out ways that they could, maybe move those cars, or if there was blocks, how they could build those blocks. And then what would happen is I would step away once they were really engrossed. So then you're saying, okay, mama's got to do something, she's stepping away, and you're giving them the space to further explore in a way that they can see you, you're in a safe place. Not all kids will be happy to independently play with you out of their sight, so just being aware of what your kids' needs are and maybe being within earshot or within eyeshot means that they're going to play for a longer period of time much more happily than you being completely out of their space. So further to those 2 points, I want to say that while it is so difficult to not do, you want to be avoiding sportscasting whatever game your kid is playing. So by kind of interjecting and being like, hey, you built that really cool tower, like that's so awesome, or like, I can see how you're like, picking out the red ones there, that's really good. While it feels like from a gentle parenting perspective that might be really positive, supportive messages, you're actually interfering with their ability to have creates kind of self confidence around their ability to play. And really it's the exploring and the failure that's part of it. And it's one of the things that I was talking about with my friends this weekend, our ability to suck at things at the very beginning, and also that it's not a bad thing for the tower to fall down and have to rebuild it. It's not a bad thing for you to be building something all out of red blocks and there be no red blocks left, so you have to use the yellow blocks. That resilience, that adaptability for change is a key skill for children to develop right up into adulthood. And it's something that I wish I was better at. So I want my kids to also be good at that. So avoiding sportscasting where you can. It's okay to throw a comment in every now and then, and obviously supporting your child if they're having an emotional time with whatever game they're playing. If, for instance, the tower has fallen down or they're having a hard time sharing certain toys, you can of course intervene if you feel it's appropriate. But a lot of the times it's easier to just step back, let them figure out what they're doing, and you intervening and sportscasting that playtime is not so helpful. So the last thing then, and while it would seem like this might be higher up on the list, it actually isn't, and that is open-ended toys. And the reason I put this last is because I don't want you to feel like in order for you to have your child engaging in independent playtime, you have to have certain toys, like certain all aesthetic, like neutral, wooden, whatever, and you have to get rid of all your plastic stuff. That is not the case. Kids also love to explore, they love to collect, they love to group things, they love to lay things out in a row, they love to pile them on top of each other. So you can start off by doing things like going on a scavenger hunt, looking for all big things, looking for all small things, looking for white things, looking for fluffy things. So they are learning as they are playing, and they are doing that grouping and that collecting, and that costs absolutely nothing. So don't feel like you have to have toys that are all one set look or super expensive, because a lot of Montessori toys, even if it's just a lump of wood, can be so expensive. So start with what you have. Try and expose your child to being outside a little bit more frequently. I always say if you're having a hard day, get your kid in water or get them outside. They're the two things that I always come back to. Every single day I'm having a hard parenting day, and check out my video that I did last week, I think, all about how I make parenting easier for me and how I can really enjoy being a parent, to get some more ideas. But the reason that I would say look at what toys you do have is that some toys that we buy, while they look, flashy and they've got music and great colors, they're really only suitable for one purpose. So for instance, if you're thinking about, I'm trying to think of like one of these obvious toys that like there's this toy and it's like, a book that you press buttons on and it makes the noises. You can't then use that electronic book or that sing-song book for any other purpose. Whereas if you were to get your child, for instance, blocks is one of the ones that every kind of it's independent play is huge variety, and there's huge opportunity in getting blocks for your kid. You can build with them, you can knock them down, you can create a row and then knock those, you can build a house, you can build a castle, you can build roads, you can put them in the back of the truck and drive along. There's so many other opportunities for learning. You can practice your letters, you can practice your numbers, you can count with them. So you can learn your colors if they're colored blocks. So by allowing yourself to add those to your unit, the birthday list or Christmas list, you are giving the gift of independent play as well. And it means that they can be used for a variety of different age groups. I have done a couple of kind of newborn, baby essentials, toddler favorites, and you will notice from those that I have recommended, those products that I have recommended, that they're almost always open-ended. So it means that you are not giving them a closed toy that can only be used for one purpose and then pretty much re-gifted to somebody else or given to the charity shop. So we always look for open-ended toys, which means that we've pretty much not had to buy anything for Archer at all. He can play with all of the toys that Atticus plays with, bar his Legos, because they're smaller. So it's lovely for them to play collectively, but it's also wonderful for their independence because there's so many different ways that they can use those toys.